The morning of my sister's wedding, I sat in the parking lot of St. Cecilia's Church in a dress that cost me $400 and ate a granola bar for breakfast because I hadn't bought groceries in 2 weeks. My phone buzzed. It was my father. "Don't embarrass us today. You know what I mean." I stared at the screen for a long moment. Outside, guests were filtering in through the big wooden doors, women in heels, men in blazers, my aunt's enormous hat visible from 50 feet away. Everyone smiling, everyone excited. I put my phone face down on the passenger seat. I knew exactly what he meant. "My name is Paige. I grew up in Macon, Georgia, the older of 2 daughters, and for as long as I can remember, I was the one who didn't quite fit the picture my parents had drawn for themselves. My sister Leah was the picture. Leah was cheerful and pretty and knew how to walk into a room and make people like her within 30 seconds. She got decent grades, dated boys my parents approved of, and never once questioned why we did things the way we did. She wasn't shallow. I want to be clear about that. She was just easy. Easy to love in the way my parents understood love. I was not easy. I was the kid who took apart the family computer age 11 to see how it worked and put it back together wrong. I was the kid who corrected her teacher in 7th grade about a math formula and then had to sit outside the principal's office while my mother drove over, mortified. I was the kid who got into Georgia Tech on a full merit scholarship and watched my father's face do something complicated. Like he was proud and suspicious at the same time, and he wasn't sure which feeling to trust. "Engineering," he said when I told him my major. "What are you going to do with that?" I told him I wanted to build things. Software, systems, tools that solved real problems. He nodded slowly, the way he nodded when he'd already decided he didn't understand something and wasn't going to try. "Your cousin Brady is pre-law," he said. "Now there's a stable future." My cousin Brady was 22 and had already failed the LSAT once. But I didn't say that. I learned early that in my family, being smart was fine as long as you were smart in ways that fit. My mother wanted me to be a teacher, maybe a nurse. Something with a uniform and a clear purpose and people she could explain at dinner parties. Paige is going to be an engineer. Didn't land the same way as Paige is going to be a nurse, and I could see it every time she tried. Sophomore year at Georgia Tech, I met a girl named Simone in my algorithms class. She was from Chicago, sharp as anyone I'd ever met, and she had this idea she'd been turning over for 2 years. A platform that helped small medical practices manage patient communication and billing without paying for the massive enterprise software that was bleeding them dry. The big systems cost practices anywhere from $40,000 to $80,000 a year. Simone thought she could build something that did 80% of the same work for under $5,000. I thought she was right. We started working on it in her apartment, which smelled like instant ramen and dry erase markers. We stayed up until 2, 3 in the morning. We skipped parties. We skipped sleep. I kept my grades up because I needed my scholarship, but everything else I had went into what we started calling Bridgeway. I didn't tell my parents. Not because I was ashamed, but because I already knew what my father would say. "That's a lot of time to spend on something that might not work out. You should be focused on finding a real job. Does this Simone girl know what she's doing?" I'd heard versions of that my whole life. I didn't have room for it anymore. Junior year, Simone and I applied to a small startup accelerator out of Atlanta. We didn't get in. We applied to another one in Nashville. We got in, $6,000 in seed funding and 12 weeks of mentorship. I told my parents I had an internship. It was easier. That summer changed everything. We refined the product. We got our first real client, a small family practice in Chattanooga. Then another in Birmingham. By the time I graduated, we had 23 paying clients, and Simone and I were both pulling enough to eat actual food instead of ramen, though not by a lot. My graduation was in May, 4 years after I'd walked onto campus not knowing a single person. My parents drove up. My mother cried. My father shook my hand and said good job and bought me lunch at a Cracker Barrel off the highway, which I am not complaining about because I was genuinely hungry. But when I mentioned Bridgeway, when I said I've been building something, I want to tell you about it, my father set down his fork. "Paige," he said, "you have a degree now. Time to get a real job." I opened my mouth. "Don't," he said, not unkindly. "Just don't." My mother looked at her sweet tea. I ate the rest of my chicken in silence. The next 3 years were the hardest of my life, and also the most alive I have ever felt. Simone and I went full-time on Bridgeway. I moved into an apartment in Atlanta with 2 roommates, a grad student and a woman who worked nights at a hotel, and I slept on a mattress on the floor for 8 months because I refused to spend money on a bed frame. Every dollar went back into the company. I ate a lot of eggs. I bought my clothes at Goodwill. I drove a 2009 Civic with a cracked dashboard that made a sound like a dying animal every time I hit 40 miles per hour. We grew. Slowly at first, then faster. 100 clients. 200. We hired our first employee, a customer support specialist named Tommy who worked remotely from Minneapolis and was so good at his job that our client retention rate jumped 12 points in 3 months. We hired a second, a third. By year 2, we were profitable. Modestly, but real. I still didn't tell my parents the details. I told them I was working at a tech company, which was true. I told them things were going okay, which was an understatement. I told them I was fine when they asked, which was complicated. My mother called every Sunday. She always asked if I was eating enough and if I'd met anyone and if I'd thought about moving back to Macon. My father usually got on the phone for about 90 seconds at the end of the call. He asked how work was. I said fine. He said good. We didn't have much else. Once, I was in my car in a Trader Joe's parking lot. This was maybe 18 months in. He said something that has never left me. I just don't want you to look back in 10 years and realize you wasted your best years on something that didn't pan out. I sat there after we hung up, and I looked at my cracked dashboard and I thought, he doesn't know. He can't know what he's saying. He doesn't know that right now. Today, I have 214 small medical practices across the Southeast, depending on software that I built, and that 11 people have jobs because of a decision Simone and I made in her apartment eating ramen. He didn't know. So I didn't say anything. Leah got engaged this spring. I turned 28. His name was Connor. He was an orthodontist, which made my parents visibly relax in a way I found both funny and sad. He was perfectly nice. He brought wine to Sunday dinners and remembered people's birthdays and coached youth soccer on Saturdays. My parents adored him. The wedding was set for June. At St. Cecilia's, which is where my parents got married. Reception at a country club outside the city. Leah asked me to be her maid of honor, which I was genuinely happy about. We had always been close in the particular way of sisters who are completely different. I loved her, even when I didn't understand her. Even when she looked at my life the way a person looks at a foreign film without subtitles. 3 months before the wedding, Simone called me into her office. This had become a proper office by then. We had 41 employees. We were in a real building in Midtown Atlanta, with glass walls and a kitchen stocked with actual food and a sign on the door that said Bridgeway Gubaway in the same blue-gray color we picked out in her apartment 6 years ago. We've been approached, she said. I sat down. The company she named was one of the largest healthcare IT firms in the country. They had reached out through an intermediary. They wanted to talk about an acquisition. I won't give the number here. I don't need to, and it still makes me a little dizzy, but it was the kind of number that makes your hands go cold and your brain go quiet for a second before it starts working again. We spent the next 8 weeks in meetings. Lawyers, accountants, due diligence teams that went through every line of our financials like they were diffusing something. Simone and I barely slept. I told my mother I was swamped with a big project at work. She said she hoped I was taking care of myself. I was not taking care of myself. But we closed the deal 2 weeks before Leah's wedding. I sat in the parking garage of our lawyer's office at 9 o'clock at night after we signed. And I called Simone and we just laughed. Not happy laughing, exactly. More like the kind of laughing that happens when something is so big you don't know what else to do with it. Then I drove to Macon for wedding week. My father pulled me aside the first night. We were at my parents' house. The whole family filtering in and out. My aunts in the kitchen. Connor's parents on the back porch. Leah floating through all of it on some kind of pre-wedding joy I was genuinely happy for her to have. My father found me in the hallway by the coat closet. He had that look, the measured, careful look he got when he was about to say something he'd rehearsed. "This is Leah's weekend," he said. "I know that," I said. "I just mean, I know you've had a hard few years with the startup thing or whatever you've been doing, and I just don't want any of that to be a distraction this weekend." Connor's family is here. People are going to ask what you do. Just keep it simple. I looked at him. Keep it simple, I said. Just say you work in tech, he said. You don't need to get into the whole thing. He said the whole thing the way people say something they consider mildly embarrassing. A phase, an eccentricity. Sure, Dad, I said. He squeezed my shoulder and went back to the living room. I stood in the hallway for a moment. I thought about the 41 people who had health insurance through jobs at a company I built. I thought about the $200,000 I had quietly deposited into an account I'd set up for my parents 3 years ago. Money that had paid off a significant chunk of their mortgage. Money they thought had come from a CD my late grandmother had left. A story I had constructed carefully. A lie I told because I knew they wouldn't accept it if they knew it came from me. I thought about the settlement funds sitting in my account from the acquisition, a number that had more zeros than I'd ever let myself imagine when I was sleeping on that mattress in Atlanta. Keep it simple, I thought. Okay, the wedding was beautiful. I want to say that genuinely, before anything else. Leah was stunning. Connor cried when she came down the aisle. Actual tears, the good kind, the kind that make everyone in the pews exhale at once. The flowers were white peonies and eucalyptus. The priest was the same one who had baptized both of us. My aunt's enormous hat made everyone smile. I gave a toast at the reception that made my mother cry and made Leah hug me for a long time. It was a good day. And then, just before dessert, my phone rang. I had it on silent, but I felt it vibrate in the pocket of my bridesmaid dress. I glanced down. It was my attorney, the one who had handled the acquisition. We had some final paperwork outstanding, a document that needed a decision by end of business Monday, and she had a question. I excused myself from the table and stepped out through the side door of the ballroom into the corridor that ran along the back of the country club. It was quiet out there, just a long carpeted hall with framed prints of golf courses on the walls and the muffled sound of the reception band starting up behind me. I answered. She had a quick question. Maybe 3 minutes total. I answered it. She thanked me. I said goodnight. I was turning to go back inside when the side door opened. It was my father. He must have come out for air, or to check on me, or some coincidence of timing that I have thought about many times since. He stopped when he saw me on the phone. I was in the process of hanging up, and before I could say anything, before I could put the phone in my pocket, his phone buzzed. He looked down at it automatically, the way anyone does. I watched his face. It was a news alert. He had Google News on his phone, which he'd set up 2 years ago and never learned to manage, and the notifications came through all day at random. This one. I don't know why it chose that moment. The timing is the kind of thing that sounds invented when you tell it, but I was there. The alert was from the Atlanta Business Chronicle. Bridgeway Health acquired in 9-figure deal. Atlanta founded startup changes healthcare IT landscape. He read it. He squinted slightly. He needed reading glasses but resisted wearing them. He read it again. Then he looked up at me. Paige, he said slowly, is this you? I didn't answer right away. The company in this article, he said. Bridgeway. Is that your company? Was, I said. We closed the deal last week. The corridor was very quiet. My father looked back at the phone. Back at me. His mouth opened slightly. 9 figures, he said, like he was running the words through some kind of translator. That's what the article says, I said. Paige. He put his hand on the wall, not dramatically. I think he just needed something solid. Why didn't you tell us? And here is the thing I have gone back to many times. In that moment, I had choices. I could have been gracious. I could have made it easy. I could have said it all happened so fast. Or I didn't want to distract from Leah's day and let him off with something soft. But I was tired. I was standing in a corridor at my sister's wedding in a $400 dress I'd bought on sale while my breakfast had been a granola bar in a parking lot, and I was tired in a way that went back a lot longer than that morning. I tried, I said. At graduation dinner, you told me not to. He looked at me. You said don't get into the whole thing, I said. That's what you said Thursday night too, so I didn't. He didn't say anything. You told me to say I worked in tech and keep it simple, I said. I've been keeping it simple for years, Dad. It was easier than watching you be disappointed in something you didn't understand. The band struck up something in the ballroom behind us, a slow song. I could hear people moving to the dance floor. I'm not, he started, stopped. I wasn't disappointed in you. You introduced me to Connor's parents as your daughter who works in computers, I said. You told me the startup thing was a distraction. You asked me every single call if I'd thought about getting a real job. He flinched. Slightly. But I saw it. I had a real job, I said. I was building one. There was a long silence. The mortgage, he said finally. Slowly. Like something was assembling itself in his head. The money for the mortgage. That wasn't Grandma's CD. No, I said. It wasn't. He looked like someone had gently removed the floor from underneath him. Paige. I'm not angry, I said. And I meant it. I was surprised to realize how much I meant it. I'm not here to ruin Leah's wedding or make a scene or make you feel bad. I'm done keeping it simple. That's all. He was quiet for a moment. I didn't know, he said. His voice was different, smaller. I know, I said. He stopped, ran a hand through his hair, which was grayer now than I remembered. I was afraid you were going to fail, and I didn't know how to watch that happen. So I kept my distance from it. It was the most honest thing he'd said to me in years, maybe ever. I didn't cry. I want to be clear about that. It wasn't a movie moment where everything resolves and the music swells. I just looked at him. This man who had shaken my hand at graduation and bought me lunch at Cracker Barrel and spent years keeping a careful distance from everything I was building, and I felt something loosen that I'd been holding tight for a long time. I know, I said again. I think I knew that. He nodded. He looked down at the phone still in his hand, the article still on the screen. Then he put it in his pocket. Can we, he started. Not tonight, I said. Tonight is Leah's, but yes, we can talk. He nodded again. I went back into the ballroom. Leah was on the dance floor with Connor, laughing at something he'd said, her dress moving, her face completely lit up. My mother was at the table with Connor's mother, talking about something that was making them both smile. The band played something slow and the lights were warm and the whole room felt like a held breath of happiness. I sat back down. My aunt leaned over. Everything okay? Yeah, I said. Everything's okay. My father called me 2 weeks later. He asked if he could take me to dinner. Not Cracker Barrel. He named a restaurant I actually liked, which was not a coincidence because I later found out he'd asked Leah. We sat across from each other, and for the first 2 courses, it was awkward in the specific way that honesty makes things awkward when you're not used to it. But then he put down his fork and he said something I wasn't expecting. I've been thinking about what you said, about keeping it simple. He looked at the table, then at me. I think I made you feel like who you are was something to manage, and I'm sorry for that. I sat with that for a moment. I don't need you to understand everything I do, I said. I just need you to trust that I'm doing it. I know that now, he said. I should have known it before. We didn't fix everything at that dinner. That's not how any of this works, and I'd be lying if I told you otherwise. There are still moments when he says something and I can hear the old reflex in it, the instinct to minimize, to manage. There are still Sunday calls where my mother asks if I've met anyone and I have to remind myself she means well. But something did change. He came to Atlanta in September. I took him to the Bridgeway office, which still exists, still runs under the new company's umbrella, and I showed him the team and the product and the whiteboard in the conference room where Simone and I had mapped out the whole architecture 6 years ago and left it up, partly for nostalgia and partly because it still worked. He stood at that whiteboard for a long time. You built this, he said. Simone and I built it, I said. No. He turned around. You built this. This is yours. I don't know if he understood the technical details. I don't think he did, but he understood something, standing there, that he hadn't understood before. I could see it in the way he looked at the room. Not like something foreign. Not like the startup thing, but like something his daughter had made with her own hands out of nothing at all. He drove back to Macon that evening and called me when he got home to say he'd made it safe, which is a thing he'd never done before. It's a small thing. But small things, I've learned, are where real change lives. I still have the granola bar wrapper in the cuff holder of the Civic. I bought a new car, eventually, but I kept the old one, parked in a storage unit outside the city, which I recognize is a little strange. My business partner thinks it's hilarious. My father doesn't know. But I go out there sometimes and sit in the driver's seat with the cracked dashboard and I think about who I was in that parking lot of St. Cecilia's, reading that text, eating my breakfast alone. Don't embarrass us today. You know what I mean. I knew what he meant. And I also knew, in a way I couldn't have articulated out loud then, but can now, that I wasn't going to. Not because of his text. Not because of anything except that I had decided, a long time ago, that I was going to be exactly who I was, completely, even when it was inconvenient. Especially then. I chose to be the difficult one. I chose to be myself. And everything else, the company, the acquisition, the dinner with my father, the whiteboard, the phone call when he got home safe, all of it came from that one choice, made over and over again in parking lots and ramen-scented apartments and hallways outside ballrooms, until it became the only choice I knew how to make. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since that night in the corridor at Leah's wedding, not in any mystical sense, just the plain, unglamorous version of it, the idea that what you repeatedly do quietly shapes, over time, what becomes publicly visible, that the years nobody sees are exactly the ones that determine everything else. My father spent a long time not seeing, and I spent a long time letting him not see, partly out of self-protection, partly because I didn't want the noise of his doubt inside my head when I was trying to build something real. That was a choice I made. It wasn't noble or dramatic, it was practical. I needed the silence more than I needed to be understood. But here's what I've come to believe, and it took me a while to get here. The decision to keep going anyway, when no one who loves you thinks it's a good idea, is not a small thing. It is, in fact, the whole thing. Integrity is easy when people are watching and approving. It costs almost nothing. The real version of it, the kind that actually builds something, happens at 2 a.m. in an apartment that smells like dry erase markers, when you could just stop and no one would blame you. When the path of least resistance is so obvious and so forgivable that choosing differently feels almost irrational. Simone and I chose differently. Over and over. Not because we were certain it would work. We weren't, not for a long time, but because we were certain that walking away would cost us something we couldn't get back. There's a kind of intelligence that doesn't show up on any test. It's the intelligence of knowing what you're willing to lose and what you're not. We were willing to lose comfort, convenience, sleep, social lives, and the approval of people who didn't believe in us. We were not willing to lose the thing we were building. And my father? I say this without bitterness now, because I've had time to turn it over. My father was afraid. That's the whole story, underneath everything else. He was a man who had played it safe his entire life and had decided, somewhere along the way, that safety was wisdom. When he looked at me, he didn't see ambition, he saw risk. And he loved me enough to be afraid of it, just not enough to trust me through it. That is the thing I most want to say to anyone who's sitting where I was sitting. In a parking lot, reading a discouraging text, eating a granola bar, trying to hold on to something nobody around you quite believes in yet. The people who doubt you are not always wrong about the odds. They're just wrong about you. And those are very different things. Paige figured it out. Slowly, imperfectly, one stubborn choice at a time. So can you.